But I would much rather have Apple, and Apple's pretty good, but like I would much rather have them do a small number of really great features than a large number of not so great features.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up a scenario we've all heard when you've got venture capital investment and they want to see a proof of concept.
Yeah, so write for a prototype or a proof of concept is not super tested, rock solid, highly scalable, right? The right thing to do when you're asked to prototype is a prototype. And like there's nothing wrong with quick and dirty. What's wrong with quick and dirty is if that becomes your long term. Does it make sense? Like what is your goal? If your goal is to experiment, you should totally do that. You should experiment as cheaply and as quickly as possible with no shame. But the thing you have to say is, and this is not the real product. This is the thing where we are testing out the user experience. We are testing to see whether somebody would actually pay for this, crazy online consumer styling service or whatever, and we do that as an experiment. And then, if and only if there's actual market value, there's product market fit, if we've actually built something that has real value and people will pay for, that's the time when you go back and go, okay, now I need your seed funding, and now we'll go back and build the real thing. And as you know, but like just to say openly, that conversation could be a VC and a startup, but that could also be a big company funder person and your project within a large company. Like it's the same exact thing where you should feel no shame in experimenting on something, but just the shame is in not being open. You're probably open with yourself, but like the shame is not being open with your funder, like what you've actually produced, right? I knocked this out in 2 days. Okay, well, we're gonna bring 1 million users on there. No, you're not. Like that's not gonna work. Yeah.
I can guess, but what are your thoughts on technical debt?
What are my thoughts on technical debt? It is totally fine to have technical debt. You just have to manage it. Just like your personal debt, right? So if any of us own houses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we almost certainly took a mortgage. I'll say I did. Like I had a startup, but like I don't have my own island, so I have a mortgage. But there's nothing wrong with that. What would be wrong is if we took a mortgage we couldn't repay. And so I think there's no shame in debt. There is shame in not being responsible about that debt. So not having a plan to pay it off, not recognizing what is required to make the debt payments, essentially. I think it's a wonderful question, and it was a slide that I left out, but yeah, great question. Okay, so cool. Yeah, so a little more on test-driven development. So like I say, let's do it right enough the first time and sort of recognize what does right mean. If we're experimenting or we're prototyping, right doesn't mean this has to live for 5 or 10 years and be scalable for 10 million users or whatever. And again, like I say, I would love to build one great thing rather than two half-done things. Right is very much not perfect, so we can and should use the 80-20 rule here. And obviously, if you're building hardware and it is difficult to change, maybe impossible to change in the field, like you have a different level of what quality means versus software where we might be able to change it pretty quickly and easily. So I don't miss that at all, but to the extent that you can kind of iterate on the thing, you don't have to get it perfect the first time, but you should try to do it properly so you're done. Does it make sense? Like, let's just be done and then move on to the next thing, and maybe we'll come back and make it better. So the implication that has at Stitch Fix, so Google has a pretty great testing culture. I was really impressed, actually. Stitch Fix also, this has nothing to do with me. I've only been there a year and a half. So this predated my coming to Stitch Fix. But one of the reasons why I came was Stitch Fix has a very strong culture of test-driven development. And the implication is that we actually don't really have a bug tracking system. So I don't say we don't have bugs. And we absolutely have technical debt that we want to repay and features that we want to build. But what we do not have is the ever-growing list of P3 and P4 bugs that we think we're gonna, we kind of say to ourselves, yeah, maybe we'll fix them, but we never will, right? So what we don't have is features that should work and don't. What we do have is a smaller number of features that do work, and a whole list of more features that we want to build, and technical debt that we want to repay. But I love that, and this is unique in my experience, honestly, and I love it. So again, I do not assert we don't have bugs. We absolutely do. I do not assert we don't have a backlog of work we want to do. Absolutely we do. But that backlog is new features and very explicit technical debt repayments, as opposed to lists of things that we should have done, like list of things that aren't quite done yet. Does that make sense? Yeah, you were first. What's my take on code coverage? There are so many metrics in our industry that I would love for them to have value and they don't. So measuring developer productivity is one. I have yet to find a good metric for measuring developer productivity. KLOX is not it. Number of hours spent in front of the keyboard is not it. I don't know what it is. I mean, I would love to find it. I haven't found it. Test coverage is similar, honestly. Probably 80% is better than 60%, probably. But I've never found that particular metric to have all that much meaning. I wish that it did. I genuinely do, but I haven't found it. Yeah, it's a great question. That's a question that I ask myself, like, how do I measure the coverage of my test suite? And answer, I don't know. I can tell you how to make it better, which is when I find a bug, the first thing I do is write a test that demonstrates the bug, then I make the fix and the test verifies the fix. That I'm sure of. So I can tell you the relative, right? But I can't give you, I've yet to find a sort of good absolute measure for quality. Do you have a question here?
I was wondering, do you have any measure for quality of the teams, or like happiness of the engineers?
Yeah, so measurement of quality of the teams or happiness of the teams. So quality of the team is pretty fuzzy. I don't really have a good one for that. Happiness of the team, you can absolutely do that in just surveys. So there's nothing magic about this, but we use a service called Tiny Pulse. I mean, there are lots of, and we ask every employee in the company, I think it's once every month or once every couple of weeks, we ask a question that's sort of how satisfied are you, and we ask a specific thing, like, and it differs, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think your career growth is going to go? Do you feel like you can grow for, I don't know, 5 more years at Stitch Fix or whatever? Anyway, so we monitor employee happiness through surveys, monitoring the quality of the team. Yeah, again, that's one of those things where I wish there were a better metric, and I just haven't found it yet. I think maybe this guy back here that found it though.
So you believe in 100% coverage of all bugs that matter to sales and marketing, right?
The question is, do I believe in 100% coverage of bugs that matter to sales and marketing? I don't know if I feel so strongly about that, but one way to get better at your test, one way to figure out, okay, so obviously we could spend an infinite amount of effort testing things, right? There's an infinite amount of things we could test. We don't have an infinite amount of resource, nor would we ever want to apply an infinite amount of resource. So what's a good 80-20 rule? And one way I have found, and it actually works even when you have 0 tests and like you want to start getting into tests, what I have found is every time there is a bug, you write a test that demonstrates the bug and verifies the fix. That's a way of continuing to ratchet up the quality. And then similarly, you're not quite asking this, but I recognize I'm not quite answering your question. But then similarly, if I'm just getting started with tests, when I write a new feature, like every time I write a new thing, I would do tests. And that's a way of trying to decide, of the infinite testing space that I could attack, what are the most valuable parts of that space. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, interesting thought, and conceptual one, on prioritizing better is going to be done, et cetera. Consider late delivery as a potential defect and prioritizing amongst everything else.
I think I missed the important words there. So considering, let me see if I caught it. So you're saying, should we consider a late delivery a defect and prioritize that with everything else?
Correct.
That sounds like a great idea.
If you scale properly, so
Yeah, right. Yeah, what's, a way to do, well, I'm sure you guys can find a counterexample, but in my head, the way to do prioritization is to find a common currency among all the things I'm trading off. And so that currency the 2 currencies I can think of are money and developer effort. And in some sense they're equivalent, but one is sometimes easier to measure than the others. So if I'm making a trade-off and I have two, currencies that don't convert, like I don't know how to trade off dollars with my health. Like I don't know how to do that. But I do know how to do, in a disciplined way, trading off dollars for dollars. Anyway, so that is a long-winded way of saying I like where you're thinking, which is if I value the delay in this project in one of those things, in developer, probably in money, but like maybe in developer effort, I don't know, but value that and then trade that off against other things in that valued or sort of denominated in that same currency, that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. Okay. Great. So I did have this. Okay. This is what I just said about transitioning to testing. So I believe if I only have a little bit of effort to spend, maybe I write functional tests rather than unit tests. Unit tests are the easy thing to do. Functional tests are the meaningful thing to do. So people have probably heard that joke of there's a drunk guy outside of a bar and he's looking for his keys. And the guy says, his friend says, why are you looking under the lamp over there? You dropped your keys over by the door. He's like, yeah, but the light's better over here. The similar idea is like, sometimes when people get into testing and haven't done it, like they want to do the easy stuff, but that's not the stuff that has the value. So again, like I say, opportunistically adding tests, as we just discussed, like find a bug, add a test, for every new feature, add a test. And yeah, so this is the metaphor that I like to use if I'm to use this. So this is in the Alps. So if anybody's ever been to the French or the Swiss Alps, they have these trains that go up these crazy steep inclines, and normal wheels would slip in those inclines. So they have what's called it's a rack and pinion, or a rack rail, a third rail in the center, and it's like a gear that's attached to, there's grooves in the rail, and then the train has like a gear that slips in there. And so I think of tests as like that. So every time I write a test, chunk, I have moved one forward, and now I can't move back. Does it make sense? It's a ratchet. So you just move forward. Every time I find a bug, I write a test, I've moved one step forward. I don't know, I won't tell this story, but or won't tell it in super great detail. In the last 2 years I was at eBay, I led a team to build the next generation of eBay's search engine, which for various reasons we kind of built again from scratch. And one of the things we built in from the very beginning was, I don't know if you've ever written, I hope people have written in C or C++, like compiler warnings are good to have or good to know about, and often if you don't pay attention to them, you have thousands and thousands of them, and then it's like too much to deal with. So we did from the very beginning, we would say, okay, this is a warning, tomorrow that's going to be a bug that fails the build, and that's one step in the ratchet. And so we would fix all the things, and then we would turn that warning into an error, done. Then we'd apply that same technique to the next warning. Okay, clear out all those warnings from the code because the code base is still small. Turn that warning into an error chunk, and we had with that discipline, we were able to have a pretty clean code base. And it helps to do that when the code base is small rather than when it's super large. But if you do it, you'll never have it happen, right? Yes, sir.
Are you then talking about the notion of automated test regression?
Am I talking about automated test regressions? Yeah, so I mean all the testing I'm talking about here is automated. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that. And absolutely what we were trying to find is regressions. Like, why do we test? We're testing in order to find whether we have, in our other changes, unbeknownst to us, broken another thing or regressed. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Continuous delivery. So at Stitch Fix, as at Netflix, as at Amazon, as at Google, most of the applications that we write are released multiple times a day. Why is that safe? It's because we have all that testing, right? So we don't release multiple times a day because we have done manual QA. There's no way that could scale. But what we do have is a rich set of automated tests that we continue, as we add features, as we fix bugs, we keep growing that test suite, and that's what allows us to release our applications many times a day. It leads to more solid systems because it is so cheap to release, we release often. And therefore, this is crazy and counterintuitive, but totally works. because we release more often, we release smaller units of work, and they are themselves less risky, right? I mean, we think we all have this intuition, but it is absolutely true, and I will find a reference at someday when I find it, when I look for it. But you know, the risk of a code change is not linear in the number of lines, it's sort of non-linear, right? It's at least there's at least a geometric term in there, if not exponential at some point. Like if I do a code change of 100 lines versus 1,000 lines, I think it's not 10 times worse, it's 100 times worse or whatever. Anyway, so smaller changes are much riskier, less risky, because it's easier to, like, the cognitive load is much smaller. It's really easy to figure out how it's gonna behave. If something goes wrong, it's super easy to figure out what went wrong because it's only these 10 lines. Like, what could, it's pretty easy to figure it out. And it's faster to repair, so if we roll it out or roll it back, it's a lot faster. Yeah? Have I experimented with feature toggles and feature flags? Absolutely. Yeah, so feature flags help a lot in this as well. Yeah, so people are probably familiar with this term, feature toggles, feature flags. So the idea is that I might be releasing a really big feature, like probably nothing I can do that's interesting is going to be actually in 10 lines. So how can I release a safe set of 10 lines, but do that 100 times, right? So release these 10 lines and another 10 lines and so on. A nice tool to have in your toolbox is this idea of a feature flag or a feature toggle, which is